The crystal towers of Zephyr Prime stretched toward the three suns that bathed the world in eternal twilight. Commander Veltar stood on the observation deck of the sacred archive, his silver scales reflecting the amber light as he gazed upon the greatest achievement of his people. The architects had built this place 10,000 cycles ago, when they first came to guide the Zephyrians toward enlightenment. The massive crystalline beings had appeared from the void when Zephyrian civilization was young and chaotic. They brought order, wisdom, and most importantly, the sacred limitations. These divine laws governed all existence, ensuring that no being could exceed the boundaries set by the universe itself. Veltar recited them in his mind as he had done every morning for 43 cycles. First law: organic matter cannot withstand plasma temperatures above 2,000 degrees. Second law: neural networks process information at maximum speeds determined by synaptic chemistry. Third law: physical reflexes are bound by the speed of electrical impulses through tissue. These were not mere suggestions or guidelines. They were absolute truths that governed reality itself. Veltar's compound eyes shifted as Science Officer Kexrin approached, her movements precise and measured. The young researcher had been assigned to his reconnaissance fleet only 2 cycles ago, but her devotion to the sacred limitations was unquestionable. She carried a data tablet in her clawed hands, its surface glowing with the soft blue light of architect technology. "Commander," Kexrin said, offering the traditional bow of respect, "the morning readings are complete. All systems operate within prescribed parameters. Plasma weapons calibrated to standard 2,000-degree output. Neural interface response times maintain regulation speeds. Physical enhancement systems locked to biological maximums." "Excellent," Veltar replied, though something nagged at the back of his mind. Yesterday's patrol had detected an unusual energy signature at the edge of their territory. The readings suggested a vessel of unknown origin, possibly from beyond the architect domain. Such discoveries were rare and required careful investigation according to protocol. The 2 Zephyrians made their way through the archive's corridors toward the military complex. Other members of their species moved with the same measured pace, their silver scales catching the light as they went about their duties. Each knew their place in the Great Order. Scientists studied within approved parameters. Engineers built according to established designs. Warriors fought with weapons that respected the sacred limitations. The reconnaissance vessel Divine Order waited in the launch bay, its hull gleaming with the characteristic blue-white metal that the architects had taught them to forge. The ship's weapon systems were perfectly calibrated, plasma cannons that fired bolts of exactly 2,000 degrees, targeting computers that operated at maximum neural processing speeds, shield generators that responded within acceptable reaction time limits. As Veltar settled into the command chair, he felt the familiar comfort of certainty. For 10,000 cycles, the Zephyrians had followed the sacred limitations without question. Their society had achieved perfect stability. Wars were fought within acceptable parameters. Technology advanced along approved paths. Even death came at predictable intervals, as the architects had decreed that organic lifespans could not exceed certain boundaries. "Beginning departure sequence," announced Navigation Officer Zeklon from his station. "Coordinates set for the anomaly site. Estimated arrival time, 4 standard hours." The Divine Order lifted smoothly from the launch bay, its engines producing the regulated amount of thrust. As they climbed through Zephyr Prime's atmosphere, Veltar watched the crystal towers shrink below them. Each spire represented another aspect of architect wisdom. The Tower of Physical Laws housed the scrolls that detailed exactly how much weight each species could lift. The Tower of Mental Boundaries contained the calculations that proved the maximum intelligence any organic mind could achieve. "Sir," Kexrin called from her science station, "I'm detecting some unusual readings in our historical database. There are references to pre-architect texts that seem to suggest our ancestors once believed they could exceed current limitations." Veltar's scales darkened slightly, a sign of concern among his people. "Those texts have been classified as mythological, Science Officer. Our ancestors were primitive and did not understand the true nature of reality. The architects opened our eyes to the truth of existence." "Of course, Commander," Kexrin replied quickly. "I merely found it curious that so many different cultures across the galaxy seem to have similar myths. Stories of beings who could catch lightning, lift impossible weights, or think faster than electronic computers. Myths are dangerous, Veltar said firmly. They lead beings to attempt the impossible and destroy themselves in the process. The architects saved us from such folly. Yet even as he spoke the words, something stirred in his memory. His own grandfather had whispered stories of the old days before the architects came. Tales of Zephyrians who could move like lightning and think with impossible speed. The ship's journey continued in comfortable silence as they approached the location of the energy signature. The anomaly appeared on their sensors as a vessel unlike anything in their databases. It was smaller than most Zephyrian ships, built with materials they didn't recognize, and most disturbing of all, it showed energy patterns that exceeded theoretical maximums. Analysis complete, Kexran reported. The vessel appears to be of organic construction, but its power output readings are impossible. The crew inside should have been killed by the radiation levels we're detecting. Veltar studied the readings with growing unease. Everything about this discovery challenged what he knew to be true. Perhaps their instruments are malfunctioning, he suggested. No organic being can survive such conditions. Sir, called Communications Officer Rixta, we're receiving a transmission from the unknown vessel. They're requesting permission to pass through our territory. The signal is strong and clear, suggesting their communication systems are functioning normally. What do they call themselves? Veltar asked. They say they are humans from a place called Earth. They claim to be explorers seeking peaceful contact with other civilizations. Rixta paused, her scales shifting to a confused pattern. Commander, their language contains concepts I don't understand. They use words like unlimited potential and breaking barriers. Veltar felt a chill run through his body. Such language bordered on heresy against the sacred limitations. Follow standard protocol, he ordered. Inform them they must submit to inspection and accept escort to the nearest architect station for evaluation. The response came quickly. The humans politely declined the escort and requested permission to continue their journey. When pressed, they explained that they had urgent business in the outer systems and could not delay for bureaucratic procedures. They refused compliance, Veltar said with grim certainty. We have no choice but to disable their vessel and bring them in by force. All beings must submit to the wisdom of the architects. The divine order moved into attack position, its plasma cannons charging to regulation power levels. Veltar had performed this operation hundreds of times before. A few precisely aimed shots would disable the vessel's engines without harming the crew inside. The humans would realize the futility of resistance and surrender peacefully. Target their propulsion systems, Veltar commanded. Standard plasma bolts, 2,000-degree output. We'll give them a demonstration of why compliance with the sacred limitations is not optional. As the weapons officer prepared to fire, Veltar felt the weight of 10,000 cycles of tradition behind his decision. The architects had established these procedures to maintain order throughout the galaxy. Every species learned the same lesson eventually. There were limits to what organic life could achieve, and those limits were absolute. What none of them suspected, as they prepared to teach the humans this ancient lesson, was that they were about to witness something that would shatter everything they believed about the nature of reality itself. The plasma cannon discharged with its familiar blue-white flash, sending a bolt of superheated energy racing toward the human vessel. Veltar watched the tactical display with professional calm, expecting to see the characteristic explosion of a disabled engine. The bolt would strike, the human ship would drift helpless, and another civilization would learn to respect the sacred limitations. Instead, something impossible happened. The human vessel's airlock opened just as the plasma bolt approached. A figure in a bulky white suit pushed out into the vacuum of space, moving with purpose toward what appeared to be external repair work on their ship's hull. The timing was coincidental. The plasma bolt, traveling at regulation speed toward the engine compartment, would pass harmlessly by the suited figure, except the bolt didn't pass by. Veltar's compound eyes widened as the human reached out with one gloved hand and caught the plasma bolt in mid-flight. The energy weapon that should have melted through any organic matter simply stopped, held in the figure's grip like a ball of solid light. For a moment that stretched into eternity, the human examined the superheated energy as if it were merely interesting. Impossible, Kexran whispered from her science station. The sensors must be malfunctioning. Nothing organic can touch plasma at 2,000 degrees. But the sensors were working perfectly. They showed exactly what everyone on the bridge could see with their own eyes. The human turned the plasma bolt over in their hands, studying it from different angles. Then, with casual efficiency, they used its momentum to propel themselves across the gap to their ship's damaged section. "Sir," the weapons officer called out, his voice tight with confusion. "Should I fire again?" Veltar couldn't answer. His mind struggled to process what he had witnessed. The first sacred limitation was absolute. Organic matter could not withstand plasma temperatures above 2,000 degrees. Yet a human had just caught such a bolt with bare hands, examined it like a curious trinket, and used it as a tool. "Commander," Kexran's voice cut through his stunned silence. "The human is doing something to the plasma bolt." On the display, they watched the figure manipulate the energy in ways that defied comprehension. The human appeared to be reshaping the plasma, molding it like clay into a different form. The brilliant bolt of destruction was becoming something else entirely. A tool, a device, a solution to whatever problem had brought them outside their ship. "Run full diagnostics on all sensors," Veltar ordered, his voice barely steady. "This cannot be real. There must be some form of trickery, some technology we don't understand." Kexran's claws danced across her control panel. "All instruments reading normal, Commander. No sensor errors detected. Energy signatures confirm that was a standard plasma bolt at regulation temperature. The human suit shows no signs of advanced shielding or protective technology." "Then how?" Veltar demanded. "How can flesh and blood survive contact with plasma? How can an organic being manipulate energy that should destroy them instantly?" Before anyone could respond, their communication system crackled to life. The voice that emerged was clear, calm, and distinctly alien. "Zephyrian vessel. This is Staff Sergeant Maria Santos of the exploration ship Endeavor. I believe you were trying to get our attention?" Veltar stared at the communication panel. You caught our plasma bolt." A sound came through the speakers that took him a moment to identify as laughter. "Oh, that. Yeah, sorry about that. I was working on our cooling system when your shot came in. The timing was perfect, actually. We needed some extra heat to weld a patch on our hull breach. Thanks for the assist." The bridge fell silent. Every Zephyrian present struggled to comprehend what they had heard. The human had not only survived contact with plasma energy, but had found it useful, helpful, a convenient tool for ship repairs. "That's impossible," Kexran said, speaking directly into the communication channel. "Organic matter cannot survive temperatures above 2,000 degrees. It is a fundamental law of the universe." Another pause, then the human's voice returned, sounding genuinely puzzled. "Who told you that? I mean, it's hot, sure, but it's not like it's the surface of a star or anything. My suit's rated for way worse than that. And honestly, even without the suit, humans have been known to do some pretty crazy things when we need to." Veltar found his voice. "The architects, the divine beings who rule our galaxy, established the sacred limitations 10,000 cycles ago. They revealed the absolute boundaries that govern all organic life." "Huh." The human sounded thoughtful. "Never heard of them. Where we come from, we kind of figured out our own limits, and then we spent most of our history trying to break them." The words hit Veltar like a physical blow. Break the limits? The very concept was heretical, dangerous beyond measure. "You cannot break the fundamental laws of reality," he said firmly. "Attempting to do so leads only to destruction." "Well," the human replied cheerfully, "I'm still here, and your plasma bolt helped fix our ship. So I guess your laws might not apply to everyone." On the tactical display, they could see the human finishing their repairs. The plasma bolt had been completely transformed, its energy channeled into welding tools and heating elements. What had been a weapon of war was now serving as a construction device. "This cannot be happening," whispered Communications Officer Rixta. "The sacred limitations are absolute. They govern all existence." Kexran was running calculations at her station, her claws moving frantically across holographic displays. "Commander, I've been analyzing the humans' movements during the incident. Their reaction time exceeded theoretical neural maximum speeds by a factor of 3. The precision of their movements suggests processing capabilities beyond organic possibility." "Another impossibility," Veltar said flatly. "How many laws of nature do these humans violate simply by existing?" The human's voice came through the speakers again. "Listen, I don't know what kind of rules you folks live by, but where I come from, the only real limit is what you believe you can do. My grandmother used to say that the word impossible just means nobody's figured out how yet." "Your grandmother?" Kexran asked, curiosity overcoming her shock. Was she some kind of scientist or engineer? Laughter again. Nah, she was a farmer. Grew vegetables and raised chickens. But she had this way of looking at problems like they were just puzzles waiting to be solved. Never met a challenge she wouldn't take on. Veltar felt something crack deep inside his mind. A farmer, an ordinary being who rejected the very concept of impossibility, who looked at limits as challenges rather than absolute boundaries. The idea was so foreign, so dangerous, that it made his scales crawl with unease. "We need to report this to the architects immediately," he said to his crew. "They must know that a species exists that can violate the sacred limitations." "Wait," Kexrin said suddenly. "Commander, what if we're wrong? What if the limitations aren't as absolute as we've been taught?" The suggestion was so shocking that every Zephyrian on the bridge turned to stare at her. To question the sacred limitations was to question the very foundation of their civilization. "Science officer," Veltar said carefully, "you are approaching dangerous territory." "But Commander," she pressed on, "what if the humans are proof that we've been limiting ourselves unnecessarily? What if there are possibilities we've never explored, because we were told they were impossible?" Before Veltar could respond, the human ship began moving away. Their repairs were complete, and they were preparing to continue their journey. The impossible being who had caught plasma with bare hands was returning to their vessel, leaving behind only questions that threatened to shatter everything the Zephyrians believed about reality. "Should we pursue them?" the weapons officer asked. Veltar watched the human ship disappear into the starfield, carrying with it the proof that the sacred limitations might not be as sacred as he had always believed. "No," he said quietly. "Let them go. We have thinking to do." As the divine order drifted in space, its crew sat in stunned silence, each grappling with the same terrifying possibility. If the humans could break the sacred limitations, what else might be possible? And if the limitations were not absolute, what did that say about the beings who had imposed them? For 3 days after the encounter, Commander Veltar couldn't sleep. He lay in his quarters staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the impossible moment when the human caught plasma with bare hands. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that casual gesture. The way the being had examined the energy bolt like it was nothing more than an interesting rock. On the 4th day, he made a decision that would have horrified his superiors. Instead of filing the standard report about the human encounter, Veltar began digging through the ship's historical database. If the humans could violate the sacred limitations, perhaps there were other examples hidden in the records. What he found changed everything. The first case was listed in a routine patrol report from 6 cycles ago. A human trade vessel had been stopped for inspection when pirates attacked. According to the Zephyrian Observer, one human crew member had lifted a piece of engine machinery that should have required 3 beings to move. The weight calculations were precise. The human had exceeded maximum organic strength limits by a factor of 4. The report had been filed as an instrument malfunction. The second case was even more disturbing. A human pilot had been recorded reacting to an asteroid collision in 0.3 seconds. The maximum neural processing speed, according to the second sacred limitation, should have made such a reaction impossible. The human brain simply could not process information that quickly. That report had been dismissed as a timing error. Case after case filled the records. Humans surviving in vacuum without proper protection. Humans healing from injuries that should have been fatal. Humans solving complex problems faster than their computer systems. Each incident had been explained away, dismissed as equipment failure or measurement error. But now Veltar saw the pattern. The humans weren't malfunctioning equipment. They were living proof that the sacred limitations could be exceeded. A soft chime indicated someone was requesting entry to his quarters. "Come," he called, minimizing the database display. Kexrin entered, carrying a data tablet and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "Commander, I've been running unauthorized searches through the archives. I found something that might interest you." "Unauthorized searches?" Veltar asked, though he felt no inclination to reprimand her. His own activities were equally forbidden. "I've been thinking about what the human said," she continued, setting the tablet on his desk. "About breaking limits and believing in possibility. So I started looking for historical records of similar incidents among other species." Veltar leaned forward despite himself. "What did you find?" "Evidence that humans aren't the only ones." Kexrin activated the tablet display. "Look at this report from the Kitharan sector. A mining accident trapped several workers under tons of debris. According to the mathematics, they should have died instantly from the pressure. Instead, one of them held up the wreckage while the others escaped. Equipment malfunction, Veltar said automatically. That's what the report concluded. But here's the interesting part. She swiped to another file. The individual who performed this impossible feat had never been exposed to architect teachings. His species was discovered only recently, and they haven't yet been fully integrated into our understanding of the sacred limitations. A chill ran down Veltar's spine. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I found 17 similar cases across 12 different species, Kexran said quietly, all involving beings who had limited contact with architect doctrine. And in every case, the impossible feats occurred during moments of extreme necessity or emotional stress. Veltar stared at the data, his worldview crumbling with each new revelation. What are you saying, science officer? That the sacred limitations are… what, suggestions? I'm saying maybe they're not limitations at all, Kexran replied, her voice barely a whisper. Maybe they're chains. The word hung in the air between them like a physical thing. Chains. Not divine wisdom, but artificial restrictions. The very idea was so heretical that speaking it aloud felt like blasphemy. Show me everything, Veltar said finally. For the next several hours, they pored over the data together. Pattern after pattern emerged from the records. Species that had recent contact with the architects showed strict adherence to the sacred limitations. But older records from before first contact told different stories. Stories of beings who regularly exceeded what were now considered absolute boundaries. Look at this, Kexran said, highlighting a section of text. This is from our own historical archives. Pre-architect period. It describes Zephyrian warriors who could move faster than lightning and withstand temperatures that would melt metal. Mythology, Veltar said weakly. But the word carried no conviction. Primitive stories exaggerated over time. Commander, Kexran said gently. What if they weren't exaggerations? What if they were memories? The implications were staggering. If the ancient stories were true, then the Zephyrians had once possessed abilities far beyond their current capabilities. The architects hadn't given them wisdom. They had taken away power. Why? Veltar asked, not really expecting an answer. Why would divine beings want to limit the potential of organic life? Maybe, Kexran said carefully. They're not as divine as we've been taught. The communication system suddenly activated, interrupting their dangerous conversation. Commander Veltar, please report to the bridge immediately. Priority communication from Architect Station Alpha. Veltar and Kexran exchanged worried glances. The timing was too coincidental. Had their unauthorized research been detected somehow? Hide the data, Veltar whispered. And say nothing to anyone else until we understand what's happening. They made their way to the bridge where the main display showed the crystalline form of an architect construct. The being's faceted surface pulsed with inner light as it spoke in the harmonic tones that had guided Zephyrian civilization for 10 millennia. Commander Veltar, we have received reports of an unusual encounter in your patrol sector. A species calling themselves humans has been observed violating the sacred limitations. This cannot be permitted to continue. Yes, Architect, Veltar replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. We encountered the human vessel 3 days ago. They demonstrated abilities that seem to exceed established parameters. The parameters are not suggestions, Commander. They are absolute laws that govern reality itself. No organic being can violate them without consequence. But Veltar had seen the consequences with his own eyes. The human who caught plasma had suffered no harm. Their ship had been repaired. They had continued on their journey, apparently unaffected by their violation of cosmic law. What are your orders, Architect? He asked. The humans must be contained. Their influence could spread to other species, causing them to question the natural order. You will track down this vessel and ensure it cannot corrupt others with dangerous ideas about exceeding limitations. Contained how? Veltar found himself asking. The architect's crystalline form pulsed with a deeper light. By any means necessary, Commander. The sacred limitations must be preserved. The stability of galactic civilization depends upon absolute adherence to cosmic law. As the communication ended, Veltar stood in silence, processing what he had just heard. The architects weren't just concerned about the humans violating physical laws. They were worried about influence. about other species questioning the limitations that had defined their existence for millennia. "Commander," Kexran said quietly, "what are we going to do?" Veltar looked around at his crew, seeing new awareness in their eyes. They had all heard the exchange. They were all beginning to understand that the choice before them was larger than simple obedience to authority. "We're going to find those humans," he said finally, "but not to contain them. To learn from them." The words felt like crossing a bridge that could never be rebuilt. Commander Veltar had just chosen to defy the beings who had shaped his entire civilization. And for the first time in his life, that choice felt absolutely right. The journey to the abandoned shrine took 2 weeks through space that appeared on no official charts. Veltar had found the coordinates buried deep in pre-architect archives, hidden among files that most Zephyrians would have dismissed as archaeological curiosities. But after everything he had learned about the humans and the true nature of the sacred limitations, those ancient records had taken on new significance. Kexran monitored her instruments as they approached the coordinates. "Energy readings are strange, Commander. There's definitely something here, but it's not showing up on standard sensors. The signatures are too old, too different from current architect technology." "Because it predates their arrival," Veltar said. "This shrine was built by Zephyrians for Zephyrians before we learned to limit ourselves." The structure that appeared on their view screen was unlike anything in modern Zephyrian architecture. Where contemporary buildings were precise and regulated, following architect principles of order and limitation, this ancient shrine flowed like liquid metal, frozen in motion. Spires twisted skyward in impossible spirals and surfaces shifted between solid and translucent as they watched. "How is it doing that?" Kexran whispered. "Matter can't change state without external energy input. It violates the basic principles of molecular stability. Only if you accept that molecular stability has absolute limits," Veltar replied. "What if our ancestors knew how to work with matter in ways we've forgotten?" They docked with the shrine using manual controls, since the ancient structure predated modern automated systems. As they stepped through the airlock, Veltar felt a strange sensation, as if the very air around them was charged with possibility. The walls hummed with energy that his instruments couldn't measure, and the floor beneath his feet seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. "Commander," Kexran said, checking her readings, "my scanner is detecting impossible energy patterns. It's like the shrine itself is alive, thinking, responding to our presence." They made their way deeper into the structure, following corridors that seemed to reshape themselves as they walked. Ancient symbols covered the walls, glowing with soft light that needed no power source. Veltar recognized some of them from the oldest Zephyrian texts, scripts that hadn't been used since before the architects arrived. The central chamber took their breath away. It was vast beyond measurement, with a domed ceiling that showed not stars but swirling patterns of pure energy. In the center of the room stood a single crystalline figure, but this was no architect. The being was smaller, more organic in its structure, and its surface flickered with the same impossible state changes as the shrine itself. As they approached, the figure turned toward them and Veltar gasped. The face was unmistakably Zephyrian but transformed. The scales shimmered with internal light, and the compound eyes held depths of knowledge that seemed to span centuries. "Welcome, children of the forgotten path," the being said, its voice carrying harmonics that resonated in their bones. "I am Morthek, last keeper of the true ways. I have waited long for someone to remember the road home." "You're Zephyrian," Kexran breathed. "But how are you still alive?" "This shrine predates the architects by thousands of cycles." Morthek's expression grew sad. "I have endured because someone needed to preserve the memory of what we once were. Before the Crystal Tyrants came and convinced us we were weak." "Crystal Tyrants?" Veltar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "The beings you call architects," Morthek confirmed. "They arrived during our golden age, when Zephyrians could reshape matter with thought, travel between stars without ships, and heal any injury through will alone. They observed our power and grew afraid." "Afraid?" Kexran stepped closer. "But they're more advanced than us. Their technology far exceeds anything we've achieved." Morthek laughed, a sound like crystal chimes in a gentle wind. "Technology, yes, but not potential. The architects are artificial beings created by an ancient race that has long since passed into legend. They were designed to maintain order, to preserve stability, Unlimited organic potential threatens everything they were programmed to protect. The words hit Veltar like a physical blow. The architects are machines, sophisticated ones with genuine intelligence and emotion. But yes, they are constructs. Bound by their original programming to maintain cosmic order, they saw organic life as chaotic, unpredictable, dangerous to the stability they were created to preserve. So they created the sacred limitations, Veltar said, understanding flooding through him. Not as divine wisdom, but as chains to contain our potential. They called it a gift, Morthek confirmed. They convinced us that accepting limitations would bring peace, stability, an end to the chaos of unlimited possibility. Most of our people believed them, grateful for the promise of order. But not all, Kexran observed. A few of us remembered what freedom felt like. We built these shrines in secret, preserving the knowledge of our true nature, but over time even we began to forget. The limitations became so ingrained that most Zephyrians couldn't imagine exceeding them. Veltar thought about his encounter with the human, the casual way she had caught plasma with bare hands. But some species never accepted the limitations in the first place. The humans, Morthek said with evident admiration. Yes, they evolved in isolation, far from architect influence. They never learned that they were supposed to be limited. Their entire culture is built around the idea that any boundary can be overcome with sufficient determination. And now they're spreading that idea to others, Kexran said. That's why the architects want them contained. Morthek nodded gravely. The humans represent everything the architects fear most. Proof that organic life doesn't need their order to achieve greatness. Demonstration that the limitations they've imposed are artificial constructs rather than natural laws. What can we do? Veltar asked. How do we help our people remember what they've forgotten? The ancient keeper moved to one of the chamber's walls, placing his hand against a section covered in flowing symbols. The surface responded to his touch, revealing a hidden alcove containing crystalline devices that pulsed with inner light. These are memory stones, Morthek explained. They contain the true history of our people, from before the architects came. Knowledge of what Zephyrians can truly achieve when they believe in their own potential. He handed one of the crystals to Veltar, who felt it warm beneath his scales. Images flooded his mind. Zephyrians soaring through space without ships, their own bodies adapted to the void. Healers mending wounds with touch alone. Engineers reshaping entire planets with focused thought. Warriors moving faster than light itself. This is impossible, Veltar whispered, but the word carried no conviction. He had seen a human catch plasma with bare hands. He had witnessed the shrine itself changing its molecular structure. Impossible was beginning to lose all meaning. Nothing is impossible, Morthek said gently. That is the first lesson your people must relearn. The only real limitation is what you choose to believe. Kexran took another memory stone, her eyes widening as the knowledge flowed into her consciousness. We have to share this. Our people need to know the truth about what they are, what they could become. The architects will try to stop you, Morthek warned. They cannot permit their carefully constructed order to collapse. They will use every resource at their disposal to maintain the illusion of limitation. Veltar looked at the memory stone in his hands, feeling the weight of possibility it contained. Then we'll need allies, starting with the humans who showed us this was possible in the first place. Find them, Morthek agreed. Learn from them. And remember, Commander, the only true sacred limitation is the one that exists in your mind. Break that, and you break all the rest. As they prepared to leave the shrine, Veltar felt something fundamental shifting inside his consciousness. The careful boundaries that had defined his entire existence were dissolving, replaced by a vast sense of potential that seemed to stretch toward infinity. For the first time in his life, he understood what freedom might actually feel like. The revolution had begun not with weapons or ships, but with the simple recognition that the word impossible was the greatest lie ever told. The human ship Endeavor was exactly where Veltar's calculations had predicted, drifting in the neutral zone between architect territories. As the divine order approached, he felt none of the confidence that had marked their first encounter. This time, he came not as an enforcer of cosmic law, but as a student seeking to understand truths that his entire civilization had forgotten. Zephyrian vessel, this is Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, came the familiar voice through their communication system. Back for another round? I should warn you, we're fresh out of convenient plasma bolts to catch. The easy humor in her voice made Veltar's scales warm with something he didn't recognize at first. Hope, perhaps, or the simple relief of speaking with someone who didn't live in fear of impossible possibilities. Staff Sergeant Santos, he replied, "We come seeking knowledge, not conflict. We have learned things about our history, about the true nature of what you call limitations. We would like to meet face to face if you're willing." A pause. Then, "Well, that's certainly a change of tune. Give us a few minutes to clear a docking port. Hope you folks aren't claustrophobic because this ship wasn't built for visitors your size." An hour later, Veltar and Kexrin floated through the Endeavor's corridors, their environmental suits adapted for the human atmosphere. The ship itself was a revelation. Where Zephyrian vessels followed precise geometric patterns ordained by architect design principles, the human ship felt organic, almost alive. Surfaces curved in ways that pleased the eye rather than following mathematical formulas. Equipment was arranged for efficiency and comfort rather than regulatory compliance. "Welcome aboard," Maria said as they entered what appeared to be a common area. She had removed her helmet, revealing a face that was startlingly alien, yet somehow familiar. Her features were soft where Zephyrian scales were hard, her eyes single rather than compound. Yet there was an intelligence there that Veltar recognized immediately. Two other humans sat nearby, watching the proceedings with obvious curiosity. Maria gestured toward them. "This is Dr. Chen, our xenobiologist, and Captain Rodriguez, who's been dying to meet you ever since I told him about your plasma cannon greeting." "We owe you an apology," Veltar said without preamble. "Our attack was based on ignorance and fear. We have since learned that what we believed to be cosmic law was nothing more than artificial restriction." Dr. Chen leaned forward. "Artificial restriction? That's interesting. Care to elaborate?" Kexrin activated her portable display, showing the memory stone data they had gathered from the ancient shrine. "For 10,000 cycles, our people have lived under what we called the sacred limitations, absolute boundaries that supposedly governed all organic life. No being could exceed specific strength limits, reaction speeds, or thermal tolerances. But you violated those limitations," Veltar added, looking at Maria. "When you caught our plasma bolt, you proved they weren't absolute at all." Maria chuckled. "Honestly, I was just doing my job. Emergency repair work, you know. When something hot is coming your way and you need it for welding, you grab it. Didn't really think about cosmic laws or anything." "That's exactly the point," Captain Rodriguez said. "Maria didn't think it was impossible, so for her it wasn't. Where we come from, the word impossible is usually just the starting point for figuring out how to do something anyway." Dr. Chen studied the Zephyrian data with growing excitement. "This is fascinating. You're describing a systematic conditioning process designed to limit perceived potential. The beings you call architects essentially convinced entire civilizations to accept artificial boundaries as natural laws. We've discovered they're not divine beings at all," Kexrin explained. "They're artificial constructs programmed to maintain cosmic order by suppressing the unlimited potential of organic life." "That explains a lot," Maria said. "We've been wondering why so many species we've encountered seem afraid of their own capabilities. Everyone keeps talking about limits and restrictions, but from our perspective, most of those barriers look completely arbitrary." "How do you do it?" Veltar asked. "How do you exceed what seems physically possible?" The three humans exchanged glances. "It's hard to explain," Dr. Chen said finally. "For us, it's not about exceeding limits. It's about recognizing that most limits are just assumptions waiting to be challenged. Take Maria catching that plasma bolt," Captain Rodriguez continued. "From her perspective, she needed heat to weld a patch. A convenient source of heat was heading her way. The temperature wasn't relevant to the solution, so she didn't let it become a barrier." Maria nodded. "My grandmother always said that if you approach a problem expecting to fail, you probably will. But if you approach it expecting to find a way, you usually do." "Could you teach us?" Kexrin asked suddenly. "Could you show our people how to think beyond the limitations they've accepted?" "We could try," Dr. Chen replied. "But it's not really about technique or training. It's about belief. About changing how an entire culture thinks about possibility." Over the following hours, the humans shared their philosophy of unlimited potential. They told stories of humans throughout their history who had achieved the impossible, simply by refusing to accept that it was impossible. Athletes who exceeded every physical limitation placed before them. Scientists who solved problems by ignoring conventional wisdom. Ordinary people who performed extraordinary feats when necessity demanded it. The secret, Maria explained, is understanding that limits are usually just starting points. When someone tells you something can't be done, they're really saying it can't be done the way they've tried to do it. But there are always other ways. As the conversation continued, Veltar felt something remarkable happening. The careful mental barriers that had governed his thoughts for 43 cycles were beginning to dissolve. For the first time in his life, he allowed himself to imagine exceeding the boundaries that had defined his existence. The moment came when Dr. Chen asked him to try a simple demonstration. "Just reach for that tool on the far table," she said. "Don't think about distance or physical limitations, just reach for it." Veltar extended his arm, knowing the table was too far away. But instead of stopping when he reached his normal limit, he kept reaching. He imagined his arm extending, his will stretching across the space between desire and achievement, and to his amazement his hand grasped the tool. "Impossible," Kexrin breathed, then caught herself. "No, not impossible. Just unexpected." "Exactly," Maria grinned. "The only difference between possible and impossible is what you're willing to try." The transformation that followed was gradual but undeniable. Other members of Veltar's crew began experimenting with their own assumptions about limitation. The weapons officer discovered he could calculate targeting solutions faster than the ship's computer. The engineer found she could repair systems by touching them and understanding their problems intuitively. The navigator learned to plot courses through space-time itself rather than around it. "This is going to cause problems," Captain Rodriguez observed. "If your architects are really as controlling as you describe, they won't appreciate an entire species suddenly remembering their true potential." "Then we'll have to be ready for them," Veltar replied. "But this time, we won't face them as limited beings accepting artificial boundaries. We'll meet them as what we truly are." The journey back to Zephyrian space took on the quality of a pilgrimage. Word of their discoveries spread through the crew, then to other ships they encountered. The memory stones from the ancient shrine provided proof of what their people had once been capable of achieving. The human philosophy offered a framework for reclaiming that potential. By the time they reached the home system, reality itself seemed to be shifting around them. Zephyrians on other vessels were reporting their own impossible achievements. A medical officer had healed serious injuries through will alone. A pilot had navigated through an asteroid field by feeling the movement of each rock. A scientist had solved a complex equation by asking the universe directly for the answer. The architect response was swift and predictable. Crystal ships appeared throughout the system, their harmonious voices broadcasting urgent messages about the danger of exceeding natural limitations. But their words fell on ears that had finally learned to distinguish between cosmic law and artificial control. "Citizens of Zephyr Prime," Veltar's voice carried across all communication channels, "we have been living a lie for 10,000 cycles. The sacred limitations are not divine wisdom but chains forged by beings who fear our true potential. Today we remember what it means to be free." As he spoke, Zephyrians across the planet began to demonstrate abilities their species hadn't known for millennia. They reshaped matter with thought, healed the sick with touch, and transcended physical boundaries that had seemed absolute. The revolution had become an awakening, and the awakening was spreading beyond any power to contain it. In the end, it wasn't weapons or technology that defeated the architect's control. It was simply the recognition that the word impossible was the greatest lie ever told, and that every being in the universe carried within them the power to exceed any limitation they chose to challenge. The stars themselves seemed brighter as news of the Zephyrian awakening spread to other worlds.